Hello, Night Watchers. I'm planning a video on sea monsters. So if you've got a story, be sure to send it in at darknessprevails.org/submit. When you run out of the dark basement, it's because something is following behind you. This world is a strange one. Yes, I'm sure we all race to the door at high speeds once we turn off the light in the basement. I can't be the only one who has heard noises in the dark only after the lights turn off. So I can only imagine what creatures slither out in the dark, what ghosts and ghouls are only inches behind me as I slam the basement door shut. So what would happen if you didn't run? What would happen if you didn't move at all? Well, tonight I will share with you 5 true basement ghost stories to show you that running might be the only option. But first, my lovely victims, I want to give a shout out to Rebecca W. for donating a generous $10 to our website renovation, and to Christopher H. for giving a just as generous $1. So yeah, even if you give $1, I'll shout out to you in a future video. So check out darknessprevails.org/project to learn why donating is an amazing idea. Now, on to the nightmares. Number 1. The Basement Flat. Submitted by Kat. I'm a 23-year-old female, and I live in the borders of Scotland. A few years ago, I was looking for a flat with my boyfriend when we came across a little flat advertised as a garden flat of an old Victorian house. We made an appointment to view it and found out it was a basement of a huge house and the landlord lived above it. She was a little old lady and seemed quite sweet. When you went inside the flat, there was a T-shaped hall. To the right was the living room, with the kitchen attached, and to the left was the bedroom and bathroom. In the hall was a door that was kept locked as it connected to the flat to the landlord's house. Anyway, we moved our stuff in, and everything was good for the first few months. But then, we started hearing strange noises and creaking. At first, we thought it was just the house. It was an old house after all. One night, me and my boyfriend were lying in bed just talking, when the wardrobe doors started shaking like crazy. We just kind of sat there looking at each other in shock. Another time, I was sitting in the living room playing Skyrim when I heard knocking. Again, I thought it was something else. I thought it was the door at first, so I went and looked, but there was nothing. So I went back to my game when I heard footsteps after that. It was like the sound feet made on carpet, like the fibers from the carpet were sticking to socks or slippers. I muted the TV and went to the hall, but again there was nothing there. My boyfriend said he had heard similar sounds and tapping when he was alone. Things would move around the flat, like the toilet roll wouldn't be on the handle. It would be on top of the closed toilet, or things would disappear and reappear in weird places. My boyfriend and I were thinking the landlord was coming in through the middle door in the hall, so we started keeping the key in the door sideways so she could not unlock it from the other side. I was heading home one day when I bumped into the landlord. I had not mentioned anything for fear of sounding crazy, or her getting pissed off that we were accusing her of something and kicking us out. But she did mention to me that she had converted the bottom of her house into a flat for her mother, who had dementia. She would even lock the middle door so she couldn't wander about throughout the rest of the house and just left her down there a lot of the time, saying she did not have a lot of patience or time for her mother. That was when I started to see that she was not a sweet old lady at all. She told me that her mom died in that flat. Later that day, I told my boyfriend what she said, and he started joking and saying maybe we were haunted, and we both laughed it off. Then began the most terrifying next few months of my life. I started, or should I say thought I started, experiencing sleep paralysis. I would wake up at night horrified, and I don't mean scared, I mean absolutely terrified. I sleep on my side, and I would wake up with this feeling that someone was behind me, watching me, inches from me, and waiting. It felt like pure hate and anger, like whatever was behind me wanted to hurt me. I thought if I ever looked at it, I would die. So I would squeeze my eyes together so hard, it would hurt every muscle in my face. After researching it, I realized that it was not sleep paralysis because I could move, and I had felt so scared too, but I could move freely if I wanted. So I would try to wake my boyfriend up next time. But he would never wake up. I would hit him in the leg or dig my hands into his side, holding him close to me, saying his name, and still nothing. I was always scared of moving too much or speaking too loud because it felt like any second this thing could reach out and grab me. It was horrible. Sometimes I would wake up on my back and I felt like something was inches away from my face. I could feel the pressure of something leaning on the bed, like it was leaning its arms at my side and just staring at me. Whenever I managed to get the courage to open my eyes, nothing was there, but the feeling of dread was still in the air. Not sleeping well is a terrible thing, and fearing going to bed is worse than anything I have ever experienced. We decided to start sleeping in the living room to see if it would help in some way. And at first it did. For maybe 1 week, I slept quite well. But one night we had stayed up late to watch a film, and my boyfriend fell asleep before me. At first I was not bothered by this and continued watching the movie. And then I started to hear a light tapping on the glass panel of the door between the living room and the hall. I decided to put it down as the old house creaking, and I tried to ignore it. About 15 minutes later into the movie, it ended, and I needed to use the toilet before I went to sleep. So I switched off the TV, I got up to open the door, and for a split moment, I could have sworn there was a face pressed up against the glass. I wasn't too scared, but I still didn't go to the bathroom. I just went to bed and made sure I was not facing that glass panel. The next day, I told my boyfriend what happened, and he suggested we put up crosses. I was very against this because I am an atheist, and I am very skeptical about the supernatural, so I said no. Fast forward a couple of nights, my boyfriend was working late. I was watching TV and eating junk food on the sofa. I thought I heard a knock at the door, so I got up to answer. When I opened the door, there was nobody there, so I dismissed it again as weird old house creaks or the landlady upstairs. When I got back to the living room out of the corner of my left eye, somebody was standing just outside the bedroom door. I was certain someone was there. I turned on the hall light and was ready to bail. But again, there was no one to be seen. I got back on the sofa and tried to calm down. Nothing else happened to me that night, but when my boyfriend came home, he went to the bedroom to get changed and shouted to me asking what had happened. Confused, I went to him, and our bedroom door was covered in all our clothes, pulled out from the drawers and wardrobe. The bedside lamp and my dresser table contents were all over the floor, like someone had been looking for something and pulled out everything in the process. I explained everything to my boyfriend, and he decided enough was enough. He put up crosses in the bedroom, the hall, the bathroom. And weirdly enough, even as an atheist, I have to admit, everything just stopped. I still don't know if I believe in the supernatural, but whatever this was, it was terrifying. We soon moved out, and we have yet to experience anything in the new flat or anywhere else. My boyfriend is convinced it was the spirit of our landlord's mother, who was either angry at me for being in her house or angry at her daughter for leaving her down in a locked basement flat to die. And maybe I was somehow picking up on her energy. Like I said, I am skeptical. All I do know is I never want to experience something like that ever again. Number 2. Basement Music. Submitted by That One Friend. I am a girl, and this happened when I was 12 or 13. This story still creeps me out. Anyway, this is the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. Back in my old house, it was about 50-something years old. I lived in that house until I was 19, and I moved in with my boyfriend, now husband. The house was one story, and it was a wide house with a basement that was not finished. I was always creeped out by it because it was cold and dark. Whenever I was down there, I felt like I was being watched or followed. It might sound generic, but I'm not kidding. We kept a lot of old toys and games down there, like dolls and stuffed animals and board games. One day when I was getting ready for school, my parents and I were in the kitchen eating when we heard this odd, low singing sound coming from the basement. It sounded like a child's nursery rhyme that no one could recognize. A low, seemingly old man's voice, muffled, singing. We couldn't tell what the voice was saying. At first we didn't think much of it, and thought it was coming from outside. But the sound did grow louder, and it was clearly coming from the basement. We even thought for a moment that some mice might have gotten into the toys. We decided to search the basement, but as soon as my father entered the basement, he turned pale. The music somehow drew closer, and the singing became louder. My dad was holding a gun and told us to run upstairs. He searched the basement, but the music got quieter as he went in, and then it abruptly stopped. I gladly went to school, still confused, and told everyone about it. I came home, and my parents were waiting for me, and I asked what happened. My father told me that the sound had vanished when he began searching the basement, and that there was no clear spot where the sound was coming from. About 6 months later, the music was coming from the basement once more, and it was louder, like it was on the steps up to the door. Again, my parents searched the basement for the sound. but it disappeared as usual. That was the last time we heard the music, and I still don't know what it could have been. Number 3. I think there is something evil in my basement. Submitted by Heater. I live in a town in Minnesota, north of Minneapolis. My parents bought their house 2 years before I was born, and I am currently 26 years old. We have had plenty of paranormal experiences in our home, most not that bad. In fact, this was not my parents' first home to be haunted, but that's a different, less scary story. My house wasn't anything special. I believe it was built on top of an old farm, and it was built in the 50s, and the former owners built an addition to the back of the house. I'm convinced that we have 2 ghosts living in the house. One lives on the first and second floor and is generally not a bad ghost. It has opened and closed our cabinets in the kitchen. It has sat on my parents' bed and listened to my mother talk. And yes, my mother talks to the ghost. It walks around my friend Rob's room. The worst it has ever done was break my action figure of Edward Scissorhands. But I think it may have been an accident, as it used to move Edward around my room and must have dropped him. The other ghost, however, lives in our basement, and I believe it is evil. My family and I do not think of our basement as creepy, but our friends do. They don't like going into our basement and avoid it at all costs. I'm going to try to describe it. You walk down the stairs and you're met with our fridge and 2 standing freezers. If you look to your left, you would see what is now my youngest brother's room, and to your right is the basement's living room. There's also a door way underneath the stairs that leads to our furnace and root cellar, and at the other end of the basement's living room is our laundry room. This first encounter with the basement ghost comes from me. In middle school, I started having sleepovers with my friends. We would usually sleep in the basement, as my bedroom was very small at the time and only had enough room for my bed and dresser. The first few sleepovers, nothing happened. I usually had my friends Katie and Maria sleep over. I would sleep on one of my brother's Boy Scout mats, and they would sleep on the beds. The first time I saw it, we had been playing video games late in the night. Katie had fallen asleep at about 2, and it was just me and Maria. I was watching Maria play Jak and Daxter, and we took turns. I had looked over to the doorway to the furnace, and floating near the top of the doorway, I saw 2 red eyes staring at us. I just sat there staring back at them, paralyzed and unsure what to do. They weren't bright or anything special, and I wasn't afraid of them because they just floated there. I think I was more weirded out. I never said anything to Maria and went back to watching her play, and eventually she felt tired and went to bed. So I kept playing. I remember looking at the doorway before going to sleep, and the eyes were gone. The next few times Katie and Maria slept over, the eyes would come back. Each time I wasn't scared, and Katie and Maria never saw them. The eyes would just stare at us. There was one time when Katie couldn't spend the night, so it was just me and Maria. We were once again playing video games late into the night. Maria had stood up to use the bathroom and gave me my turn to play. When she came back down the stairs, she sat on the bed and started reading one of her books. She let me play for the rest of the night, for she just wanted to be wrapped up in a blanket and read her book. The next Monday at school, she asked if I believed in ghosts, and I said yes. She told me the reason she asked, and why she didn't want to keep playing video games the other night, was because when she sat on the bed and looked at the doorway, she saw 2 red eyes near the top staring back at her, and they had stared at her for over an hour. Maria did continue to come over, but we never told Katie. Katie never saw the eyes, but she did experience something else. It was one of the many times both of them slept over. We had all been asleep for a while, but Katie woke up in the middle of the night to pee. But something in her gut told her to stay in bed. She laid there for about a minute when she heard a growl in her ear. She just laid there panicking silently. She had looked around and saw nothing. Then she woke me up, tears silently rolling down her face, and told me that something had growled at her. I looked around and saw nothing, but then I took my friend very seriously and I woke up Maria too. The 3 of us all went to my room that night, and somehow we all found room to sleep. Katie never slept over at my house after that. And that was actually the last time I had encounters with that evil ghost in the basement. For about 5 years we saw nothing of that ghost. I even still had sleepovers in our basement until I got my older brother's room, which is currently still my room. At this time, my older brother Joe and I switched rooms, and my younger brother Mark moved into my dad's hobby room in the basement, leaving my youngest brother Zach with his own room. Mark liked having his own room, even if it was in the basement. He at first had no problems living in the basement. One day he was building his Lego town in his room when he started to hear scratching at the door. Mark thought at first it was one of our dogs, so he got up to let the dog in his room. And when he opened the door, nothing was there. He brushed it off, thinking that the dog had changed her mind and went back upstairs. When he got back to his chair, he heard the scratching again and went back to the door to open it up. But once more, there was nothing there. This time he left his door open, thinking that the dog would just come on in, if it wanted to, and he went back to his chair. But before he could get back to his desk, the scratching started again. Mark turned around and saw nothing at the doorway. Occasionally, the scratching came at random times, but Mark never did anything about it. He would just sit there and wait for it to stop. He eventually put a lock on his door, mainly to keep Zach out of his room as he liked to sneak in there and play with Mark's Legos. One night, Mark was just about to fall asleep when he heard his door handle violently shaking. He immediately rolled over and stared at his door. The door handle just shook and would not stop. After about a minute of it, Mark started to cry and begged for it to stop and to leave him alone. And finally, it did. After sitting on his bed for another minute, he threw open the door and saw that nothing was there. He ended up sleeping in our family room the rest of the night. It continued to scratch at the door occasionally and would shake the door handle in the dead of night, here and there. And my brother Mark never said anything to my family, but he did tell his friend Will. Will started spending the weekends over at our house and would sleep on one of the Boy Scout mats in Mark's room. And he too heard the scratching and saw the door handle shake. Mark and Will would yell at the ghost and tell it to stop, and eventually it would stop. It didn't do this every weekend. One night, however, Mark and Will were both fast asleep. Mark was suddenly awakened by something hot dragging down his back. Mark cried out, waking up Will. Will asked him what was wrong, and as Mark was explaining that something hot went down his back, Will screamed and jumped to his feet. For the next minute, both cried out in pain as the hot thing kept going down both of their backs. And when it had stopped, both of them ran up the stairs to my parents' bedroom on the second floor. Mark woke up my mom crying and explained to her everything that had happened. Both Mark and Will showed my mom their backs, and they both had long red scratch marks along their backs. They were shaking and terrified. They ended up sleeping in the living room on the first floor, my mom on the couch, Mark and Will in the floor. Will kept coming over on the weekends, spending the night. The ghost scratched at them one more time. But that time, my mom went into the basement and told the ghost that it had the rest of the basement to itself and to leave Mark in his room alone. And for the most part, it left Mark alone, going back to scratching the door and shaking the door handle here and there. Mark eventually moved out and got his own apartment. My brother Zach moved into the room in the basement, and my best friend Rob moved into Zach's room. And now Zach has started to have his own problems with the ghost. It scratches at the door and shakes the door handle, and some nights when his friend Ryan sleeps over, they can hear it growling on the other side of the door. Mind you, at the time I had only told my family about the red eyes. I had actually forgotten about what happened to Katie until it started growling at Zach. A few weeks ago, the ghost scratched Zach and Ryan. My mom went down to the basement and yelled at the ghost, telling it to leave my brother in his room alone. Since then, Rob and I have been sleeping in the living room and in the basement occasionally. We haven't had anything happen to us. My mom thinks it does nothing because I stay awake until 5 in the morning. And who knows, it might be a good thing I stay awake so late. But whatever it wants, I know it's evil, and I do not plan to mess with it. But I will not let it hurt my brother. Maybe Rob and I can make it go away if it shows up again. Number 4. The Basement. Submitted by Vanessa. In every house I've lived in, something always goes bump in the night. This incident comes shortly after moving across the valley from our home on Harris Street. The move was good and the new home felt lighter and brighter. You could actually breathe. It didn't take but a few months for the small paranormal stuff to begin again. Voices, shadows, items being moved around. We had an old piano in the garage the landlord let us keep that would end up playing creepy but faint low notes in the middle of the night, and every so often during the day. One night, we had a friend sleeping over, and we decided to hang out in the basement and tell ghost stories. Now, in order to get to the basement, you literally have to go through the entire house. This was a 6,000 square foot home with giant windows everywhere. They were beautiful during the day, but at night it just made you feel paranoid. If you've heard my story about my incident in the garage when I was 6, you'll understand why it was worse for me. Now you have to walk through a dining room, past the living room, and down the hallway into my parents' room, through their bathroom, and into their closet where you're met with a steep staircase that heads to the basement. In the basement, there was this cool little square-shaped vent that leads up to the backyard. Not that it has anything to do with what happened, but I always thought it was cool. Anyway, so we're sitting down there talking about how creepy the house is and what's been going on. And our friend says that she really didn't believe our house was haunted, since nothing had happened to her just yet. So we start asking questions out loud. The normal, if somebody is there, make a sound type questions. But we got nothing. So we sit there in a circle of silence for a few minutes and we wait. And wait. And still nothing. Now our friend is giving us the "you're lying" look, and my sister got frustrated and directed this sentence to our poltergeist. "Man, are you seriously not going to do anything? This is so stupid." She didn't even get to finish that sentence. In the basement, my sister had a toy kitchen sitting up against the wall with a phone hook on its right side. Before she could end her statement, the phone on her kitchen levitated up and slammed into the wall several feet away. We all started screaming and huddled together. Man, oh man, after this, our friend believed us now, and she wanted out of that basement. But no one wanted to be the last one to run upstairs, and after a few seconds on thinking about it, I offered myself as tribute, since I was the oldest. So we ran upstairs, out of the closet, through the bathroom, and out of my parents' room down the hallway, past the first living room, through the dining room, and into the second living room to tell my parents. They hadn't heard our screams and were occupied watching a telenovela. We told them what had happened, and my mom sent my dad with us to go check it out. So we went back, and we sat waiting in the basement to see what else would happen. But nothing did. So we said that maybe if we turned off the light, something would happen. We sat in complete darkness for 5 to 7 minutes, our eyes adjusting to the dark slowly, the only light being from a couple of vents in the ceiling to my parents' closet. Nothing happened, but we could hear faint rustling noises and the lights in the vents dimming in and out. But it could have been my eyes adjusting. Suddenly, we hear my mom call for my dad. We open the basement door and my mom is at the top of the stairs, pointing to her room, demanding to know what we did. My dad tells her we had been in the basement the entire time, and her face instantly changes from confusion to fear, and she calls us up to look at her bedroom. It had been entirely and thoroughly trashed. All the drawers were open and clothing was thrown out. A 4-foot doll had been sitting in the corner, clearly thrown across the room now, and her bedding was yanked off. She said that when we went off to the basement, she went to the kitchen to make a quesadilla. She was warming up the stove when all the lights went off in the house, and she could hear things banging and moving from the bedrooms. So she went to reset the breaker switch, and the lights came back on, and that's when she went to see what all the ruckus was. Let's just say that we all slept in the same bedroom that night, with the lights on. Not to mention our friend never spent the night after that again. And number 5. I never liked my basement. Submitted by Ashley Faye. I was always an imaginative kid, always reading stories about paranormal encounters like Goosebumps and the like, always writing stories and drawing, painting. I had a very vivid imagination. With that being said, I didn't just imagine the following events that occurred. I've always thought myself to be a bit of a sensitive, being able to sense presences around me. In my childhood home, it wasn't always the most inviting and warm place to be. When me and my sisters were kids, we would spend most of our days playing together, either in our rooms or in the living room we had in our basement. The amount of days we'd spend down there in that cold, dark basement, I've lost track. We had a VHS player. Back then VHS was the hottest thing, and we had every Disney or kids movie possible. We just really loved eating snacks and making forts so we could watch our movies from it together. But something wasn't quite right about our basement. For starters, it was always freezing cold, to the point where you'd need to layer blankets on you just to get a bit warm, but it still never really worked. Also, things were always going missing down there. You'd place something on the coffee table, reach for something else, and when you turned around, that thing you had just put down had disappeared. But no worries, you'd find it months later in the most random place. We always felt like someone was watching us down there. So many times we'd race up the stairs as if the devil were at our heels, trying to grab us, trying to bring us down into the pit of hell if he caught us. It just always felt eerie and creepy down there. If you were in the basement and you knew you were alone, you could always hear footsteps upstairs. Many times we paused our shows, shouted up the stairs for whoever or whatever it was that entered, but no one would answer. We would even go upstairs to find still no one there. Also, we'd always hear footsteps leading from the staircase of the basement, then into the hallway, only for the footsteps to stop as it approached the basement, only mere feet away from being where we were sitting. We had a small dog at the time, and he would never step foot in the basement either. Being kids, we would drag him down there with us so we could play with him. But the second he got loose, he'd run like hell right back up those stairs. I mean, it's one thing when kids run from the dark as soon as they turn out the lights to get out of the basement. But when a dog is scared to death and does the same thing, that gives you something to think about. We would try to tell our parents about it, but being the imaginative kids that we were, they always brushed it off as, "Oh, you're just being kids, there's nothing at all to worry about." One day, I think it was my 12th birthday, I had my friends over from school. My mom would not let my friends come over often, but she made an exception this time because it was my birthday. We were playing hide and seek, running around the house and probably causing a huge headache for my poor mother. We had agreed on the couch being our home free base. You know, the spot where you couldn't be touched and you were immune from the seeker. My friend was the seeker and I was running away from her at full speed, trying to get to my couch. The way my house was laid out, you had to go down the hallway, past the basement door to get to the living room where the couch was. The basement door was wide open and my mom was downstairs doing laundry. The moment I ran past that door, I remember just white hot pain and then something warm on my foot. I was going so fast that I didn't slow down until I was on the couch. Then I looked at my foot and I found 3 long, deep cuts across my foot, like someone had slashed my foot open with claws. Blood was gushing out everywhere. I showed my friends and I started crying in pain, but not just from pain, but from fear. My mom ran upstairs when she heard my scream. They were all very freaked out, but one of the older girls said it was probably just a piece of glass in the carpet. After my mother bandaged my foot, we all scoured the carpet near the basement door, trying to find anything sharp that could have caused those wounds. And wouldn't you know it, we found nothing. There was absolutely nothing there that could have caused this injury. What's even stranger though is that there was nothing on the ground or sitting near the door that I could have perhaps hit my foot on to cause this injury either. We all just kind of shrugged it off and tried to continue on with the game, but I, of course, couldn't run on my foot. I sat down beside my mom. She looked really concerned. I asked her what was wrong. "What's the matter, Mom?" I asked her. "Funniest thing," she said. "I had a dream about this happening, about someone getting their foot torn open near our basement door." I just kind of looked at her in disbelief. Usually my mother was the one telling me that there was nothing to be afraid of. When she didn't say anything, I just replied, "Well, it was probably just something sharp in the carpet like we thought." "No," she protested. "I vacuumed that carpet this morning before anyone came over." I am now 30 years old, and I still won't go into the basement. I think that most people don't have accessible basements, and I'm sure after these stories those folks are glad that they don't have to worry about the basement door opening while they sleep, as something dark and evil moves about their homes unseen in the dark. Personally, I've never lived in a house with a basement, but I spent the night at a cousin's who did quite frequently. And let me tell you, we kept away from that thing like it was the plague, as if the grudge itself could pop out of it at any time. But don't worry, my victims. If you've got a basement and there's something down there lurking in the dark and attacking your children, there's always one final option. Move away. Move far away. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send us your true encounters with sea monsters at darknessprevails.org/submit. Thanks.